Hello and welcome to ExamPadi. Today's topic is Military Rule in Nigeria Part 1. And in this lesson we will 1. Explain military rule and enumerate the causes for military intervention. 2. Explore the structure of military rule. 3. Discuss military rule from 1966 to 1975, 1975 to 1979, and 1983 to 1985. 4. Explain the roles of government structure under the military rule. And 5. Examine the performance of military administration. Historical evidence clearly shows that military rule is a detrimental form of governance. The military's self-interest often precedes the citizens' welfare, and their unchecked power can lead to disastrous outcomes. This can result in a breakdown of law and order, with citizens' fundamental rights being violated without recourse. In pre-modern societies, political regimes often combine military, religious, economic, and monarchical power. Come along with me as we define what military rule is. Military rule, also known as a military regime, is a political system where the military wields significant power. This power is often acquired through a coup d'etat, a violent overthrow of the existing government by the armed forces. This form of governance, when implemented, has led to profound societal disturbance, with citizens' welfare often being neglected. What are the reasons for military intervention in Nigeria politics? Since Nigeria became independent on October 1, 1960, it has had 5 successful military coups and an avalanche of unsuccessful ones. The military came to power as a result of the following. Number 1. Tribalistic loyalties. Ethnic and tribal divisions influenced military actions, especially during coups and counter-coups. Number 2. Displeasing election results. Military leaders often seized power when they disagreed with election outcomes or perceived electoral irregularities. 3. Regional or state-based political parties. Political parties of the First Republic were all regional political parties. For example, NPC was for the North, NCNC was for the East, and AG was for the West. 4. Politicalization of the army. The army or military of the First Republic maintained a status quo and thereafter became politicalized. Appointments and promotions were based on tribal and political sentiments, not on seniority or merits. Number 5. Disputes over census results. Another reason for the military involvement in politics in Nigeria was because of the 1962 and 1963 census results. Number 6. Western Nigeria election crisis of 1965. This was another election crisis that drew the attention of the military into the political process. Number 7. Allegation of corruption, nepotism, sectionalism. Nepotism and sectionalism played major roles in appointments, promotion, and so on, which led to the military intervention in Nigeria. And number 8. Absence of honest and reliable leadership. Let's examine the structure of the military government in Nigeria. Number 1. The head of state or president. The head of state, sometimes called the president, is also the commander-in-chief of the Nigeria Armed Forces. As the head of state, he presides over the meeting of the Armed Forces Ruling Council, known as AFRC, the Council of States, and the Council of the Ministers. His duty is to appoint and dismiss ministers, ambassadors, high commissioners, chief justice, judges of the Supreme Court, High Court of Justice, and so on. all subject to the approval by the AFRC. Number 2, Supreme Military Council, known as SMC. AFRC, SMC, with the new nomenclature of the Armed Forces Ruling Council, is the highest legislative organ of the military government in Nigeria. It is composed of the head of state or president, who is the chairman, the chief of general staff, the chief of defense staff, and chairman, joint chief of staff. The heads of the army, navy, and the air force, popularly called service chiefs, the inspector general of police, justice minister, secretary of the federal military government, and high-ranking military officers. Number 3, the Council of States. This organ advises the head of state or president on important national issues. It is made up of the head of state or president as the chairman, the chief of general staff, former heads of state, and all state military governors. Number 4, National Council of Ministers. This is the organ that implements the decisions and policies made by the AFRC. It is headed by the head of state or president and assisted by the chief of general staff, with all federal ministers as members. Number 5, the state military governor. A state military governor is the chief executive and the head of state military governments. He is the representative of the head of state or president in the states. He is responsible to the head of the federal military government and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The governor performs both the executive and legislative functions. He is the chairman of the State Executive Council. He appoints the state commissioners and other state officials. Number 6, the State Executive Council. This organ is responsible for the formulation and execution of the state military government's decisions and policies, maintenance of law and order in the states. It is headed by the military governor with the commander of army units in the states, the state commissioner of police, the secretary to the state military government, state commissioners, and other state officials as members. Do you know that the first military rule in Nigeria took place between 1966 to 1975? Would you like to know who was the military ruler at that time? Come along with me as we examine the military rule between 1966 and 1975. The first military coup in Nigeria took place on the 15th January 1966, led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nziogu. But the then most senior military officer, Major General J.T.U. Aguiyi-Ironsi, later took over the position of the head of state. What was the structure of government under General Aguiyi-Ironsi? In his capacity as the head of state, General Ironsi suspended the constitution and dismissed the executive and legislative arms of the federal and state governments. He appointed military governors as sole administrators for the 4 regions, and they were assisted by permanent secretaries. He, with the governors, constituted the Supreme Military Council, SMC, with power to formulate policies for the whole country. He also asked the Federal Executive Council, comprising civilians, to assist him in the execution of policies. General Ironsi appointed a Constitution Review Commission under Chief Rotimi Williams and the Commission for the Review of the Unification of the Federal and Regional Civil Services, headed by Francis Nwokedi. In July 1966, there was a counter-coup. There were both civilian and military casualties in the 15th January 1966 coup. However, while the Prime Minister, a Northerner, the premiers of both the northern and western regions, and some other notable people from these regions were killed, there was no prominent Easterner that was killed. There were also many Igbo officers among the coup plotters, which gave some other Nigerians the impression that it was intended to usher in Igbo domination on the nation. This impression was helped by General Ironsi's appointment of Igbo officers to head most of the armed forces divisions and positions. He later introduced Decree 34 of 24th May 1966, abrogating federalism and replacing it with a unitary system of government. Thus came the counter-coup that killed General Ironsi and Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuri, his host, on the day of the coup, and ushered in Lieutenant Colonel, which later became General Gowon as head of state. What was the structure of government under General Gowon? General Gowon abolished Decree 34 of General Agoyin Ironsi and returned Nigeria to federalism. He also created 12 states by Decree 27 of May 1964. He retained the titles of Head of State, Supreme Military Council (SMC), and Federal Executive Council for the organs of government at the federal level. Under General Gowon, at the top of the structure of the military government under Gowon was the Head of State. He, General Gowon, was the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and the head of the Federal Executive Council and Supreme Military Council. He appointed the Chief Justice, other justices of the Supreme Court, and other federal judges. The appointment of judges was made on the advice of the Judicial Service Advisory Committee. He also appointed most senior civil servants on the advice of the Public Service Advisory Committee. He, in addition, appointed Nigerian ambassadors to foreign nations. Under the head of state was the Supreme Military Council (SMC). Members of the SMC included the head of state and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces as the chairman. Others included the Chief of Army Staff, Chief of Air Staff, Chief of Naval Staff, the military governors of 11 states, and the administrator of the East Central States. The SMC formulated policies, took decisions on major national issues and foreign affairs, and maintained law and order. Under the SMC was the Federal Executive Council. The Federal Executive Council comprised the head of state as chairman, the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Naval Staff, Chief of Air Staff, military governors of 11 states, and the administrator of the East Central States. It also included civil commissioners, most of whom were politicians. Under the Federal Executive Council was the state governments. Each of the states had a military governor and an executive council, responsible to the federal government. The state military governor had legislative and executive powers, so he made edicts and chaired the state executive councils, most members of whom he appointed. Other members of the council included the secretary to the state governments, civil commissioners, state police commissioner, permanent secretaries, and the commanding officer of the army units in the states. What were the achievements of the 1966 to 1975 military regimes? Number 1. Major General Ironsi made some impact during his short rule. He restored normalcy, especially in the West, after the coup. He sought to build a stronger United Nation by instituting the unitary system. Number 2. Gowon created 12 states which allowed better development in the area. Number 3. The Civil War could not really be blamed on Gowon. He succeeded in ending the Civil War in 3 years, reconciling with the Igbo, and implementing much reconstruction work in the war-ravaged East. Number 4. The National Youth Service Corps (NYSC) scheme was established, which made young graduates knowledgeable about their fatherland and encouraged nobility of labor and unity among Nigerians. And number 5, there was general development in the educational, health, and many other sectors during Gowon's regime. The failures of Gowon's regime includes the following. Number 1, Gowon's regime failed to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and so mass poverty continued. Number 2, the regime failed to carry out a reliable census. Number 3, the regime failed in effecting the recommendations of the Udoji Commission, on the increase of workers' salary and allowances. The regime backdated the increases, resulting in very serious inflation and instability in the labor market. Number 4. Contrary to his program of handing over governance to the civilians, Gowon did not put in place any political project like the formation or registration of political parties. The second military rule we'll be looking at is the military rule from 1975 to 1979. On 29 July 1975, Brigadier Late General Murtala Mohammed, in a bloodless coup, took over power from General Gowon, who was in Kampala for an Organization of African Unity meeting. General Mohammed was killed in an abortive coup on 13 February 1976, leaving his deputy, General Obasanjo, to continue his program. This situation gave the regime the tag Murtala Obasanjo regime. What are the reasons for Murtala's coup? Number 1. Majority of Nigerians had become disappointed with Gowon's regime after allegations of corruption against some of his key officials at both state and federal levels, officials whom Gowon single-handedly exonerated. Number 2. After the Civil War, Gowon had promised to hand over power to civilians not later than the 1st of October 1976. Unfortunately, on the 1st of October 1974, he announced that the date could no longer be met. Number 3. The inflation that arose from the payment of Udoji Commission's recommendations and the long-term arrears created instability in the economy, which made Nigerians uncomfortable. Number 4. In the last years of his government, General Gowon had taken decisions and implemented many programs without consultation with the people. What then was the structure of Murtala Obasanjo government? There was the Federal Executive Council, composed as under Gowon's regime of the head of state as chairman, the chief of army staff, naval and air staff, state governors and federal commissioners, many of whom were civilians. The Supreme Military Council, however, excluded governors, who are the chief of staff, supreme headquarters as the link between them and the head of states. There was, however, an advisory body to which governors belonged. This was the National Council of States, an advisory body that deliberated on issues relating to states or the whole nation. Let's discuss the achievements of the Murtala Obasanjo administration. Number 1. National Purge. The administration from its inception stated clearly its mission of ridding the public service of corruption and redundancy. Number 2. Creation of states. The Murtala Obasanjo administration created additional 7 states, bringing the total number of states to 19. Number 3. Creation of new Federal Capital Territory. A panel was set up to consider restructuring Nigeria politically and solving the problem of a new era, central, acceptable capital for the country. This panel located Abuja, which is Nigeria's capital today. Number 4. Local government reform. The administration restructured the local government system and standardized it through Nigeria. Number 5. Policy of low profile. Wasteful expenditure was reduced and government personnel were made to use cost-saving measures and embark on only compulsory trips and projects. Number 6. Agricultural boosts. The regime initiated the Operation Feed the Nation program, whereby both states and federal governments established farms and encouraged mechanized farming, making high-yield seeds and fertilizers available to farmers. Number 7. Dynamic foreign policy. The regime pursued a dynamic foreign policy that made Nigeria maintain a leadership position in Africa and a respectable place in the world. The nation spearheaded support for the newly independent Angolan government and liberation movement in Namibia, Mozambique, and South Africa. Number 8. Demobilization of the army. The large Nigerian army was reduced by about 50,000 officers and men, making the army more effective and manageable, and saving much cost for other important national needs. Number 9. Return to civil rule. Unlike the Gowon regime, the Murtala Obasanjo administration was definite and consistent in its handover program to a civilian government. And number 10, it instituted a Constitution Drafting Committee, CDC. The Constitution drafted by the CDC was further considered and amended by the Constituent Assembly. The failures of the Murtala Obasanjo regime include the following. Number 1, the Public Service Probes and Purge, meant to instill discipline and a sense of probity, were carried out discriminately in many cases. This greatly dampened the working spirit of civil servants who saw their security of tenure as no longer assured. Corruption continued in many places. Number 2, General Obasanjo's Operation Feed the Nation failed to stop the inadequacy of local production. There was much mass media publicity but little results. And number 3, mass poverty continued as there was no program of redistribution of wealth and no concrete effort at providing or increasing housing, educational and health facilities. Finally, in the part 1 of this lesson, we will be looking at the 1983 military coup. Civil rule, which began in October 1979, lasted for only 4 years and 3 months before it was terminated by another coup on 31 December 1983. What were the factors responsible for the 1983 military coup? Number 1, during the Shagari regime, the nation's wealth was allegedly squandered. Grandiose projects which had a little relevance to the needs of the people were introduced, and government officials spent much money on numerous foreign trips and unrealistically high salaries and allowances for legislators and executives. Number 2, the cost of food and other essential goods rose astronomically by the beginning of 1983. There was an artificial scarcity of foodstuffs like rice and other commodities, all of which had to be imported and made easily available mainly to government loyalists. Number 3, there was a high level of unemployment. Young school leavers roamed the streets in search of jobs, and government could not afford to pay workers salaries. Number 4, the health sector was in shambles. Brigadier, now General Sani Abacha, who announced the change of government, had said, "Our hospitals have been turned into mere consulting clinics." Number 5, there was alleged widespread corruption in government. Various public office holders allegedly engaged in fraudulent financial practices. Contracts were awarded without following laid-down procedures. Number 6, the Green Revolution and housing program of the government, which the government called its focal programs and earmarked enormous resources for, turned out largely to be failures. Number 7, a situation of insecurity became established in the country. There was a high level of incidents of armed robbery, looting, arson, riots, and murder. Let's analyze the structure of the Buhari government. The Buhari administration follows the structure of the Murtala Obasanjo regime. Thus, at the apex of government was the Supreme Military Council, comprising 16 senior military officers, the Inspector General of Police, the Director General of the Nigerian Security Organization, and 3 civilians, namely the Attorney General of the Federation, Secretary to the Military Government, and Head of Civil Service. There was the Advisory National Council of States, comprising the head of state as chairman, the chief of army staff, supreme headquarters, and the 19 state governors. The Federal Executive Council that ensured the execution of government policies included 18 ministers in charge of various ministries. The state governors had commissioners, one of whom at least must be a woman. Let's look at the achievements of the Buhari administration. Number 1. At the inception of this administration, the economic situation in the country was in a mess due to corruption, mismanagement, and abuse of public office. The new regime took major steps towards revamping the economy and recovery of embezzled funds. Number 2, to instill discipline in both the civil service and the whole citizenry. The Buhari regime launched what it refers to as war against indiscipline, which encouraged orderliness, moral probity, cleanliness, and patriotism. Number 3, the regime reorganized the country's foreign missions with a view of cutting costs as much as possible. Number 4, the Buhari administration allocated greater funds for the development of agriculture. It also increased the number of river basin and rural development authorities. The failures of the Buhari regime includes the following. Number 1, the regime took many steps on very important issues without due consultations with many senior military officers, opinion leaders, experts, and other well-meaning Nigerians. Number 2, the Buhari regime was considered by many as being repressive. It promulgated decrees which provided for detention without trial, curtailment of press freedom, and a death sentence for drug trafficking, among others. Some of these decrees were considered to be in violation of fundamental human rights. Number 3, the regime's program of ridding the public service of corrupt officials led to indiscriminate mass retrenchment and unemployment. Number 4, many stalls of some houses were destroyed in the program of street clearing. All these brought untold hardship on Nigerian citizens. And number 5, the regime had no well-defined foreign policy and so could not maintain the dynamism of the Murtala Obasanjo foreign policy. We have come to the end of this lesson. Attempt these questions to evaluate yourself. Number 1, explain the meaning of military rule and elaborate on a few reasons for military intervention. Number 2, discuss General Agunyi Ironsi military regime. Number 3, analyze General Murtala and Obasanjo military regime. And 4, explain 6 causes of the first military intervention in politics. Thank you for learning about military rule in Nigeria Part 1 with me. I'll see you in the Part 2 of this lesson. Bye for now.